Okay, hello everybody, how you guys doing? My name is Mark, this is Why I Hate the World, What's Happening? And we're going to do something a little bit different today. Today we are talking about Christian identity and hate groups and where they came from and their, brief history of what Christian identity is, where it came from, and how it spun off into the Aryan Nations and their continued influence on hate groups and the alt-right today in particular. So, but before we get into all that, let's take a look at what we're drawing here. So I wanted to kind of, here is the thing that we finished up in the last live stream. If you guys can see that, this is our, deep one that we did over the last like 3 or 4 live streams. And, just to kind of show you guys, I think it looks pretty good. I'll probably make a print out of this. In fact, I think I'll put this as it is up on my DeviantArt page, so you guys can like download that if you want. And then I'll do prints the same way that I make the, coffee stain prints that I usually do. So I'll sell those if everybody wants to buy one. And I'll also put it up there so that if you just want a copy of it, you can just download it, like for free, so that's cool. Anyway, so that's, I thought that turned out pretty good, and I'll probably have that up by next week. And if you don't remember, this little thing of these goofy monsters, this was a thing that we actually drew maybe last year sometime, and I just never got around to scanning it in, so I figure, why don't we color this? That'd be kind of cool, as we're in between pieces right now. So, hopefully all the software meshes together. I don't know, I haven't actually live streamed me photoshopping anything in a while, so hopefully it doesn't all get screwed up. But anyway, let's go ahead and continue on here. Excuse me. Okay, so I need to finagle my monitor here so that I can see the comments and my notes at the same time, so excuse me real quick. Alright. So let's see here. We're talking about Christian identity, right? Now, first off, what is Christian identity and why is it relevant nowadays and in today's, environment? Well, it is basically a fringe religious movement that had a very, very big impact and influence on white supremacists over, the 20th century. And it kind of came into prominence during the 1980s, right? With the rise of the Aryan Nations and, like, organized hate groups and stuff like that. And it's mainly adherents to it have kind of dropped off a cliff recently, so it's sort of, wow, why is this not, let's just do default, there we go. Hang on a second, folks, something is really, let's just do auto levels. Okay, output levels. So I'm trying to, let's, hang on, give me 1 second, folks. This is not looking how I thought it should look. That didn't work at all. Crap. Oh, you know what? It's because I'm looking on, I have the wrong layer selected. Ha ha ha. See, whenever you scan something in like this, you see how it's sort of grayish. The darks are like grayish right there. What you want to do is you want to go up to image and then go to adjustments and then go to levels. There we go. And now when I do this, it'll make everything like, nice and dark, right? There we go. So you notice how that sort of evened out all the blacks, kind of mostly. Anyway, so let's just get that going here. Yeah, so where did it come from? Well, basically, what is it? What exactly is Christian identity, right? It's this this idea that only white people have souls. I don't know if you've ever heard that before. Like, you hear this kind of thing a lot, especially now when it comes to, like, in alt-right circles, these same ideas still sort of get, filtered down, right? And so you hear it a lot. Like if you've ever heard the term, well, they'll call minorities mud people. Uh, hey, how you doing, Dynacat? Thank you. I'm why you never get anything done. Well, sorry about that. But anyway, yeah, if you've ever heard like the insult where they call minorities mud people, if you've ever heard that, or this idea that even in Christian dominionism, like only Americans, are only Christians are actually American, or that only white people are American and only white people are Christian. That this is kind of where this comes from. This idea of Christian identity, right? Hang on. This brush, I need to go into the brush, and I need to make it hard. Okay, there we go. And I need to get rid of the smoothing. Alright. Because see, it's leaving that weird sort of ghosty edge, which I don't like. Even though this is so small that if you were to zoom out, you wouldn't even notice it. It gets on my OCD. That's the problem when you do Photoshop stuff like this and you zoom way in and all that stuff. Yeah, I start getting like weird OCD things going where I have to go through and like, fix little tiny imperfections where even if you were to zoom out and see it at 100%, like you wouldn't even notice what I was just doing. Right? It's not even something that the human eye can like register, but at the same time, like it still drives me nuts, and I got to go in and erase all this crap. So anyway, yeah. So if you've ever encountered that, if you've ever encountered another tenet, I guess, that these people sort of originated is this the idea that modern Jewish people are not the real Jewish people, and in fact they're like either pretenders or they're the literal spawn of Satan. We kind of touched on that a little bit in the last few streams. They call that the serpent seed doctrine. We'll get into that a little bit too. So that's where this stuff comes from, right? Let's put another tooth right there. There we go. That's where all this stuff comes from. It comes from a Christian identity, right? So where did Christian identity itself come from? Where did this movement, because Christian identity is not really a denomination of Christianity. It's not like its own cult or anything like that. It's more of a doctrine, more of a dogma that certain churches adhere to, right? So there is no church of Christian identity, but there are multiple churches that sort of follow this dogma, right? This sort of highly racist, highly, I guess it's a very much like the religious underpinnings of white supremacist hate movements, where a lot of these people sort of justify their hate through teachings like this, where they can like pull out Bible verses and stuff like that in order to support their really extremely, reactionary hate ideas, I guess. So where did all this stuff start? Right? Well, Christian identity has its roots in, excuse me, a movement called British Israelism, right? And what that's actually something that goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, right? And that was sort of a belief that the British people, like that white people, but more specifically the British people in general, the ancient Britons were descended from the lost tribes of Israel, right? So, and there's sort of writings and stuff that support this idea that go all the way back to 1590. So this is like, this is some long, these are ideas that have been gestating for a long time, right? Now, so I guess we need to talk about British Israelism, right? British Israelites, I guess, right? If I'm even pronouncing that shit right. So it was sort of, so there's books, you know, from the Middle Ages that basically say that the British royal family is descended from the line of David, right? And that kind of comes from that sort of divine right of kings kind of thing. But during that time, it really wasn't seen as a racist ideology. It was more to give the British royal family legitimacy, to where they could claim, you know, God put us in the throne, you know, that divine right of kings, right? So they, you know, they basically invented this mythology claiming that they were, you know, that you could trace the British royal family all the way back to Adam, you know, back to the very first human being, Adam, right? And that's kind of where that came from. But at that point, back in the Middle Ages, it really wasn't seen as an anti-Semitic thing. Not really. It was more of solidifying, you know, solidifying the divine mandate for the British royal family, right? And all of this other stuff sort of grew out of that. Sean Nillabud, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining. Yeah, and genocide, exactly. A little bit of time goes on, and by the beginning of the 19th century, right around like, you know, I guess maybe not the beginning, but maybe around the first half of the 19th century, right around 1837, 1840, right? British Israelism sort of became a thing, right? And it's basically, the idea behind it was that, okay, the lost 10 tribes of Israel eventually made their way to the British Isles, and that the people, the ancient Britons, were descended from the lost 10 tribes of Israel, right? And some variations of this would say that it wasn't just the British people, but it was also all of the Northern European cultures, right? You know, the Celtic and you know, the ancient Germans and the Nordic people, and all those were all descended from the ancient, you know, the lost 10 tribes of Israel, right? So if you don't know what that is, the lost 10 tribes of Israel is actually based in some real history. And what that is that roughly around the year 800 BCE, there were Israel, like the ancient kingdom of Israel, was broken into two kingdoms, right? So you had the northern kingdom, which was called Israel, and the southern kingdom, which was called Judah, right? And the southern kingdom was comprised of two tribes, which was Judah and Benjamin, right? And then the other 10 tribes were in the north, which were Reuben, Simon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Manasseh, and Ephraim, right? So I probably mispronounced all those like crazy, but you know, what can I say? Sorry. Right. Anyway, those were supposedly the 10 tribes that lived in the northern kingdom of Israel, right? And right around the year 722 BCE, they were conquered by the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So there were two Assyrian empires. This is the second one, which they call the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And the leadership of the tribes were basically taken as like hostages and slaves, and you know, exported to Babylon, right? I think, was it Babylon? Anyway, but they were you know, they were basically enslaved, and long story short, the 10 tribes essentially disappeared, right? And what really happened to them, nobody really knows, but the archaeological evidence basically said that most of the population from the Northern Kingdom just migrated to the Southern Kingdom, which makes sense because, you know, it's a war, right? There's a war, they lose a war, and you have, you know, refugees, which that makes perfect sense. I mean, what would happen if, you know, your northern neighbor loses a war? All the people that get displaced would go to the southern kingdom, right, as refugees and stuff like that. And so that's kind of what the archaeological evidence says, right? And the 10 tribes of Israel have kind of become like one of those ancient mystery kind of things that you see on, like, you know, the History Channel and shit, where they, and lots of different groups have kind of claimed that they're part of the lost tribes of Israel. You know, things like, there's all kinds of places, there's all kinds of groups of people that claim ancestry from them, and some of them actually do have a little bit of evidence. Like, for example, there's a tribe called the Lemba from South Africa who actually have a little bit of genetic evidence, you know. Basically, in their genes, they, you know, they have a little bit of evidence that shows that some of the you know, people of the Levant might have settled there, right? And then there's other claims that are just incredibly out there and wacky. You know, for example, people that claiming that you know, various groups throughout North Africa, you know, Kashmiris from India, Pashtuns from Afghanistan, stuff like that. Other people that, you know, some really out there fringe groups claiming that, like, the entire nation of Japan was descended from the one of the lost tribes, or that you know, Mormons who claim that Native American tribes were actually, you know, part of the lost 10 tribes, stuff like that, and things that, so it kind of veers from, you know, some groups that actually have some archaeological and, like, you know, genetic evidence, and then others where it's just like wacky, you know, fringe sort of BS pseudo archaeological theories with no basis in reality. You know, the kind of stuff that you would read in the New Age section next to the alien abduction books, right? So it sort of runs the gamut from there. But as to what really happened to him, you know, nobody really knows. We just know that most of the people, you know, went to the Southern Kingdom, right? So British Israelism, right, claims that you know, the 10 tribes eventually made their way to Northern Europe and founded, you know, many of the cultures in Europe. You know, Dan, the tribe of Dan became the Danes, for example, stuff like that, right? And in particular, the ancestors of the modern white British people were part of the lost 10 tribes of Israel, right? So suffice to say, there is zero evidence for this at all, like archaeological or otherwise, right? And most of the claims, you know, they have to do with you know, like, basically there is no evidence at all. It's just all, like, made up bullshit, right? With based off of fake documents and, like, forgeries, things like that, right? No evidence at all for this. Just keep that in mind. It's all just it's all just made up, right? So, but people believed it, and, you know, archaeology really wasn't an exact science for most of the 19th century. You know, I mean, they used to just, like, dynamite fucking ruins open, stuff like that, right? And really, a lot of archaeology back in those days, you know, back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, all of it had, you know, usually a lot of bias. A lot of bias, you know, and also a lot of it had political motives along with it too, where, you know, things like fringe theories like this were done mainly as a way of justifying superiority of, you know, British colonialism, for example, stuff like that, you know. And that was actually a motivation behind British and Israelism as well, you know, the idea that, well, you know, the British have this massive globe expanding empire, right? And, like, a way of justifying that is saying, well, we're, you know, the British people were actually descended from people that were crafted by the hand of God himself. That kind of justifies it, in some people's minds. It gives a religious, you know, gives a religious justification, saying, you know, God created us to have dominion over the, you know, mud peoples of the earth, right? So you hear that a lot too when it comes to British you know, British Israelism as well. You know, that sort of white man's burden kind of excuse for colonialism is mixed up with that a lot. So let's see. Okay, let me just kind of take a little check here for a second, guys. Hey, I see we actually have some people watching. Awesome. Let me go back to my notes. All right, so anyway, where were we? So the core beliefs of this, yeah, the core beliefs of British I keep mixing up those words, goddammit. British Israelism, right, is that the white British people specifically are, you know, descended of the Israelites, right? And they fulfill all of the prophecies of the Israelites as told in the Bible. You know, things like the, you know, the Old Testament, stuff like that, right? And that the current Jewish people are not real Israelites, right? And you'll encounter this a lot. This is called the dual house tenet, I guess, the tenet of the dual house. Like, well, wait, where's the word? Should I have it written down here? It was the, God damn it, I just lost my place. Sorry, guys. The two house theology, that's what it's called. Right, the idea that the modern day Jewish people are not actually Jewish, right? And that they're made up of converts or something like that. So this kind of evolves, and we'll get into what it evolves. You know, it evolves into what's called the serpent doctrine, right? But we'll get into that later. But this idea, okay, so the two house theology is basically has also given rise to what's called the Kazar Myth, right? And in the beginning, it was just most people that believed in British Israelism, right, in the beginning, were not anti-Semites, apparently, right? In fact, apparently there were also a lot of actual, you know, for real Jewish people that believed in this too, right? And it was sort of like a kind of a, you know, pre-Zionist sort of movement in some circles, right? But it didn't take long for some anti-Semitism to take root. And one of those things was this notion that Jewish people were not the actual, like the modern Jewish people are not actually like descended from, you know, the 10 tribes of Israel. Like they were not actually descended from ancient Israelites, right? And so you have, you know, that sort of evolved into what's called the Kazar Myth, right? And what that is, actually have some, well, we'll get into that in a little bit. But at this point, with British Israelism, like, that didn't really take that much of a hold just yet, but there was that sort of seed was germinating, you know, that that was the idea. It's like the real Jews that are alive today are white British people, and the modern Jews are just pretenders, right? So it wasn't straight up like full blown, you know, anti-Semites at this point, but it was starting to kind of get there, right? So we already talked about how the British monarchy supposedly was descended from the line of David. So that's you know, that was part of it as well. And a big part of this too had to do with the excuse me. A big part of this too had to do with one particular story in the Bible, which was the story of Jacob and Esau, right? E-S-A-U, am I pronouncing that right? Esau? And that's a story from the Old Testament where Jacob is the son of Isaac, right? If you remember right, Isaac was the one kid who was going to be sacrificed on the mountain, and then, you know, God suddenly provides a ram in order to sacrifice instead. Right, so that guy, you know, the kid that was about to be murdered in a ritual, right, goes on to have two children, and it's Jacob and Esau, right? And if I'm pronouncing that wrong, please let me know. And the story goes like this: Jacob, you know, is kind of dishonest. If you've ever read this particular story, and what it is that Isaac really likes Esau because Esau is the firstborn, right? And he wants to get the blessing. And what the blessing means is basically the blessing of the firstborn meant that you got all of the land and titles and wealth and stuff like that after the father dies, you know, because it's a patriarchal society, right? And but then, you know, Jacob's mom is named, I think her name is Rebecca, really wants her son Jacob to get the blessing, right? So Jacob pretty much just kind of fools Esau into giving it up. He bribes him with like a bowl of soup, and Esau's kind of a moron, so he goes for it because he's like out working in the field one day and he's hungry, so he goes, "Sure, I'll give you the blessing if you give me some soup." So it's like the implication is that Esau's kind of an idiot anyway. Right? So then, you know, when but of course that is the justification for what Jacob does next in the story. So in the story then, Isaac is about to die, and he wants to see you know, Esau to give him the blessing so that he can inherit all of his wealth and stuff, and, you know, be the patriarch. And then Jacob shows up, and apparently Esau was really hairy. So Jacob has a goat skin, you know, like with goat hair on it, and shows up, and then like his father, you know, Isaac is blind, and so Isaac feels the goat skin and thinks it's Esau's hairy arm, which I don't know why anybody believes this shit, but whatever, that's the actual Bible. That's what it actually says, right? So he thinks that his son with the hairy goat skin is actually, you know, Esau, and he gives him the blessing, right? So that's the idea. That it's like basically the idea is that you know, because Jacob then goes on and he's the one that wrestles the angel and gets the name Israel, and supposedly the story of Jacob and Esau is to explain why later on in the Bible God commands the Israelites to destroy the Canaanites, because according to the story, Jacob goes on to found the Israelite nation, and Esau goes on to found the Canaanite nation, and that's why they're enemies, and that's why it's okay to kill all the Canaanites, because God gave the blessing to this other kid, and not the first one. Not the firstborn. So that's basically the entire point of this story, is to justify genocide. That's the entire point of the story of Jacob and Esau, right? Essentially. And, you know, it doesn't take a genius to realize that this is all made up bullshit to begin with, but this is somebody's religion, so whatever. You know, people believe it, right? And that figures a lot. So why am I bringing up this story? Because it figures a lot into the you know, British Israelism and later on Christian identity, right? Because they take this as symbolic of, you know, modern Jews and you know, white British, you know, the white British people who are supposedly the real Jews, and they compare, you know, the white Britons to Jacob, and then modern Jews to you know, Esau, and basically say that, you know, the same thing is, it's symbolic. It's symbolic that you know, we're the real inheritors because you know, the white British people were the actual descendants of Jacob, you know, so we got the blessing from God. That's basically, you know, so that's how they kind of justify this stuff, right? By cherry picking passages of a made up bullshit story in the Bible that has no, you know, is probably complete horseshit to begin with. Right? This is what they, this is the theology, right? Anyway, and a lot of that, went on to, in later on in the white Christian identity movement and whatnot, this same sort of like theology was used to justify slavery. It's used to justify genocides around the world. It's used to justify colonialism, and the way that the British treated their subjects in India and Africa, places like that. So, it's good to be able to understand these things, to understand the roots of all this and where it came from. And you can even see the same kind of rhetoric even today, when people talk about minorities and welfare programs and stuff like that. You could still see the same rhetoric. It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Anyway, so, and then I wanted to kind of talk about that story because it's going to come up like 3 or 4 times during this talk. We're going to refer back to that same story, the struggle between Jacob and Esau, right? Anyway, so one more thing from that also that kind of relates to that story is that they sort of, and this is also a core belief of British Israelism, is the idea that Britain and the United States are the current inheritors of Jacob's birthright. All kind of relates back to this story, So they kind of compare, the Britain to Jacob, and then later the United States to Jacob, right? Saying that, so we're like divine nations, according to them, that have inherited the birthright of, inherited Jacob's birthright, and thus we're the chosen people, right? So that's what that whole idea, if you've ever heard the idea of the Israelites were the chosen people, that's where that came from. It came from that story. And now, the United Kingdom and later the United States are now the chosen people, right? And you hear that, a lot in even modern just mainstream conservative rhetoric. This idea that American exceptionalism and this nation, was chosen by God, right? That the United States is special, has a divine mandate in order to bring, justice and light to the world and all that. Like, that's kind of where, this shit comes from. Kind of the theological underpinnings beneath all of this, and it gets a little lost when you hear somebody like Tucker Carlson or some shit talk about this stuff on, Fox News or whatever. And it's good to know. It's important to know that it's basically the exact same rhetoric that people were using 200 years ago in order to justify slavery, in order to justify, wiping out the Native Americans, right, or that kind of thing, or to justify, expanding into, colonialism and stealing people's resources, shit like that. It's the exact same shit. It's like, it's really, the conservatives really do not have any new ideas, because every idea they have is just recycled from some bizarre racist doctrine from fucking 200 years ago. And that really is true. I mean, you hear people say that and you think you think it's all just hyperbole. It's not. Right? So, anyway. So the idea that the British royal family was related to the line of David, that shows up as early as 1590, of course. We talked about that a little bit. But there was a book, that kind of came into prominence during the early 19th century, right around 1835, 1840. There was a book in 1844, called Our Israeli-ish Origins by a guy named John Wilson, right? And that had a big influence on British Israelism. And by 1880, it was a distinct movement, So there were actually, societies and stuff of people who would meet, you know, that kind of thing. And right around that time, there was also like a revived interest in the occult and spiritualism, stuff like that. You know, it was sort of one of those eras where, you know, kind of one of the first times in modern history where you had sort of a free thought movement was right around then. So you had lots of interest in new philosophies and things right around the end of the you know, 19th century. You know, this is where the beginnings of things like vegetarianism as a lifestyle and health and fitness show up, and you know, differing religions, and you had like occult societies and things like the Order of the Golden Dawn, and you know, and people getting into Buddhism and stuff like that. Like this is right around that time, right around the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the early 20th century, is where you got this sort of proliferation of ideas, you know, that started to happen for the first, you know, probably the first time in modern, and well, I don't know, I wouldn't say the first time, but it was definitely an era where you saw a lot of you know, interest in new philosophies and stuff like that. And so it makes perfect sense that something like this would, you know, come to the forefront during that era, right? And anyway, so right around that time, you know, by 1906, there were roughly 2 million or so adherents to this, you know, philosophy, right? Because there were lots of different groups and societies and things like that. And some of the early leaders, there was a guy named Edward Hine, Hine is his last name, so it's either Hin or Hine. He was one of the early sort of proponents of British Israelism, and he believed that the Anglo-Saxons specifically were descendants of the Lost Ten Tribes. I couldn't find out exactly which one, you know, since there's 10 of them, right? Because, but there are also some of the, you know, because there are other adherents to this that had variations where they think that other Northern European white people were also descended from the 10 tribes. But he specifically said, you know, the British people were, you know, specifically descended from, you know, the 10 tribes here, right? And, where did I lost my place here? Okay. And he also believed that modern Jews were descendants of the Canaanites. So you started to see a little bit of that anti-Semitism creep in, right? Although at this point in the history, they were still very much pro-Jew. You know, I guess you call them philo-Semites, I guess is what you call that, which is the opposite of an anti-Semite. So apparently they were still very much in support of actual Jews, and actually right around this time is where you started getting like early Zionist movements too. And some of these people were in support of early Zionist movements, you know, like the idea of a Jewish homeland in the Middle East, you know, years before the state of Israel was established, right? But still, it started to kind of creep in. You know, you start as time goes on, it starts getting more and more anti-Semitic. And eventually will just turn into a full-blown hate group, as we'll see in a little bit. So yeah, but this guy, yeah, he identified modern Jewish people with the Canaanites, right? And as you know, in the Old Testament, God gives the Israeli, you know, gives the order to Israel to completely destroy the Canaanites and steal their land there. You know, and apparently a quote by this guy, Edward Hine, was this. This is one of his quotes. Maybe Great Britain is unaware that the Canaanites are the Jews, as we have the same problem in the United States today. Yahweh commissioned Israel to completely exterminate every Canaanite on the face of the earth. Thus, we better know for sure who they are. So, starting to creep in there a little bit there, you know, and this is as early as, this is 1906, okay, so, you know, these ideas are not new, so that's just kind of the lesson, you know, when you go on Reddit or something like that, and you hear somebody claiming that Jewish people are the spawn of Satan, or that black people have no souls, or whatever, when you hear this stuff, you got to remember this is not something that just came out of nowhere. This is shit that's been around for, you know, hundreds of years at this point, right? This is it. This has its like these ideas have their genesis going back, you know, it's literally a century, right? Which really does go to show that, you know, people on the right, the right, the fringe right, the alt right, the, you know, those people, they really do not have any new ideas. Like they're essentially just recycling the same shit over and over and over, the same tired ass, you know, racist claptrap that has no basis in fucking reality. So, you know, anyway, let's see. So anyway, yeah, this guy Robert Hine, he established, basically established the movement in the United States, and his ideas still show up in white supremacist circles today, right? Another guy, one of the early proponents of this, was a guy named Herbert Aldersmith, right? How are we doing on time, by the way? I can't see. Wait, hang on a second, guys. Let me just check one thing here. Sorry, give me a second. I can't see how long we've been streaming for. I need to check something. We've been going for, I can't tell. It's not on here. What the hell? Oh well, it's only been about 40. Shit, it's been 42 minutes. Holy crap. Okay. Well, anyway, sorry about that. I had kind of lost track of the time. Let me just get all this back going. Anyway, so talking about Herbert Aldersmith, right? He was also a proponent of British Israelism, and this guy was actually a doctor, and he did an interesting side, you know, note for this guy is that he had some of the earliest research when it came to ringworm. So, you know, very interesting person, you know. And he predicted, you know, so Herbert Aldersmith was a doctor, and then he also kind of started a church as well. And, you know, he promoted this British Israelism stuff, right? And he predicted the end of the world, of course, would be on May 29th, 1928. Which of course didn't happen, and then later predicted that the final battle of Armageddon would take place in 1953, which, you know, was years after he died. So that's one thing you always get from people, right? Whenever you get these radical preacher guys predicting the end of the world, you know, and it goes wrong, what they always do then is they push the goalpost back, and it'll be some point in the far off future, which is far enough, like close enough that some people would still be alive, but far enough to where the actual person making the prediction will definitely be dead. That's what he did. So he goes, oh, my first prediction failed, so I'm going to predict it to be 30 years later, after which I will no longer be around. And of course, in 1953 comes and goes, and the world does not end. Although that was the year that the hydrogen bomb was created. So some of the adherents to this stuff claim that that prediction was fulfilled because of the hydrogen bomb. But I still see the world being here. So even though they did create the hydrogen bomb that year, the world did not end, so I don't know how you can say that prediction was a success. Anyway, so he's an interesting guy. But by the second half of the 20th century, the British Israelism was kind of on its way out. It started to die off, right? And it was kind of kept alive by fringe religious groups. So now, keep in mind that this really wasn't a religious thing to begin with. Back in the day, it was more of like a movement, you know, like a doctrine, right? You know, a way of justifying things like, you know, imperialism, shit like that, right? And there were, you know, you'd have like the British Imperial Society, you know, the British Israelite Society, stuff like that. But they weren't really churches. But by the second half of the 20th century, it became a religious doctrine. And you still have today, there are churches out there today that still preach this stuff, although they're kind of on the decline, you know. Most notable was one called the Worldwide Church of God, right? Which was kind of started as a radio ministry back in the 1930s, you know. And it, yeah, kind of had that same sort of, you know, fire and brimstone sort of shit that you would imagine a radio ministry out of Kentucky would have. Right. But they definitely kept it alive all the way up until, you know, the 80s, until the founder of that church was a guy named, Herbert W. Armstrong. Right. And he eventually dies, and his church splinters off. So this guy, Herbert Armstrong, dies, and then the people who take over his church want to make it legit and join the actual organization of evangelical churches. But, you know, they're not going to go for that if you're preaching this you know, pseudoscience, borderline racist bullshit, right? So they kind of abandoned British Israelism. And that caused the church to splinter off because, you know, people like to hang on to their racism, so a bunch of side splinter churches kind of started after that. And there's still a few of them that are around today. One's called the Philadelphia Church of God. Another is the Living Church of God and the United Church of God. So many of these are still around, and they're sort of like these borderline, like these small borderline cult sort of churches. And they still teach that white people are the actual Israelites, you know, and specifically British white people. And now I guess that's been transferred over to America. So, you know, they teach that Americans are the actual Israelites and all that, and this is a Christian nation, blah, 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 right? And it's divinely mandated by God, and that's why, you know, that's why it's abortion is bad, and you should hate Muslims, things like that. This is why, you know, churches that still preach this shit to this day. Okay. Although it is definitely on its way out. Right. Anyway. So yeah, the Worldwide Church of God has been renamed and lives on as the Grace Communion International. And they have abandoned their British Israelite beginnings and teach the usual standard evangelical BS, you know. But at least they're not teaching. Teaching this pseudo fucking archaeological racist horseshit anymore. So I guess that's better than nothing, right, folks? I mean, anyway, so British Israelism sort of was the precursor to Christian identity. And British Israelism, for the most part, like I said before, was very much pro-Israel. You know, it was very much pro-Semitic, right? But you did see a little bit of beginning of anti-Semitism sort of creeping in there, especially with the two-house theology, right? The idea that, you know, that the modern Jews are not real Jews, blah, 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 right? That started creeping in there. But for the most part, they were actually still very much pro-Semitic, you know. And apparently there were actually some actual Jewish people that were adherents of it. And by basically by the end of the 20th century, you know, that sort of evolved into what is known as the Christian identity movement proper. Right. So the Christian identity movement is highly, highly, highly bigoted and racist and anti-Semitic, you know, and actually this is the wrong brush. I need a different, I need something like that. There we go. And anti-Semitic, right? And, you know, homophobic, right? They're basically everything that, all of the bad shit that you would associate with Christianity and Southern religious bigotry kind of had, you know, their genesis with these guys, right? Any kind of, you know, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, you know, Islamophobic, stuff like that. You name it, these guys are into it. Okay. And it sort of began, Christian identity proper began in the 1920s, right? And it was heavily, heavily influenced by British Israelism. It was essentially an evolution of British Israelism, right? I don't like how that looks. Let's kind of go down and choose more of a greenish. There we go. Heavily influenced by British Israelism, right? And the main core tenets of Christian identity is that only white people, right? Only white people are the actual true, you know, Israelites, right? And God, it takes a sort of a strict interpretation of Genesis. So if you read Genesis, it actually says there are actually two creation myths sort of jammed together. And it says that, you know, God creates man, and then God creates Adam and Eve, right? And usually that's taken as allegorical. You know, like people will combine those two creation myths, and they really aren't really separate creation myths, although some people think they are. But these guys have a very strict reading of that, and what they say is that God creates the first set of men from mud, along with the beasts of the field, right? And that's where you get the term mud people from. So if you've ever heard a white supremacist insult you, calling you a mud person, that's where that's from. The idea that this doctrine that really doesn't have any basis in theology, really, that God created, you know, all the animals and stuff out of mud, and along with those, the first, like, non-white people, right? Beasts of the field that wore sackcloth and shit like that. There's a Bible verse that relates to that, right? That they use to justify this view. And then they say that Adam and Eve were created separately and during a different creation, and they were made out of clay. So that is not really what the Bible says. The Bible says that mankind was made out of dust, you know, the dust of the earth, right? It does not say that Adam and Eve were made out of clay and everybody else was made out of mud. That's complete, you know, there's no scriptural, you know, I mean, if you're a believer in this shit, because I'm really not, but if you are a Christian and you believe these things, you know, rest assured there is no scriptural basis for any of that. It's complete bullshit. They also use an incorrect etymology for the word Adam, claiming that it comes from the Hebrew word for red. And the idea being that it means red, so it means red in the face, i.e., you know, white people, right? Right? Which it doesn't, you know, the etymology for Adam actually comes, it's actually a pun. It means from the earth, right? So, DMN, dumb, right, means to produce, means to produce, right? And Adam means the ground. So basically, the word Adam in Hebrew literally means produced from the ground, made of earth, right? It's basically a pun, is what Adam is. So, yeah, none of this shit, you know, so it's all made up bullshit. It doesn't even, you know, but even their own made up bullshit is not backed up by, you know, the Bible or whatnot. Anyway, right? Let's see. Let's get a little bit of a smaller brush size here, do some highlights. So anyway, where was I going with this? Oh yeah. Another core belief of Christian identity is that during the end times, all non-white people will be exterminated in the final battle, and those who are not exterminated will be enslaved and will live on as slaves of the chosen white people in the kingdom that is to come. So apparently Jesus Christ himself is going to come back, enslave everybody who isn't white enough, and, you know, kill those who stand in his way. So, you know, a very, very loving and loving and all-inclusive theology there. God, according to the Christian identity people, seems to be a very, very nice guy. Right. And, and they believe in all the usual ridiculous white supremacist bullshit that you get from any of these people as well, Anti-Semitism, homophobia, anti-science, stuff like that, with a lot of belief in conspiracy theories among these people too. Things like the NWO and the Jewish people are running everything and blah blah blah, and the protocols of the elders of Zion and whatnot. All the usual stupid white supremacist claptrap horseshit. White genocide and all of that shit. They believe all that crap. So basically, if it's like white supremacist bullshit, these people believe it. Okay. They're also very much against banking, which they consider as usury, because in the Bible it actually says usury is bad, right? So what is usury? Usury is where it's basically charging interest. It's the way that banks make money, right? You loan some money to somebody, you charge them some interest, so it becomes worth your while to loan the money out, right? That's the only way that you can actually make money by loaning money, is to charge interest. And the thing about that is that it specifically says in the Bible you're not supposed to do that, right? So during the Middle Ages, that was an occupation that Christians were not allowed to engage in, right? So who was allowed to engage in that? Well, Jewish people were, right? So Jewish people would loan out money. They became known as money lenders, and this is part of the origin of the stereotype as Jewish people as money grubbing, greedy, monsters or whatnot. Right, because they would actually charge interest on people, and people would say that's usury, or that's a sin, blah, blah, blah. But, right, well, it was one of those occupations that they were kind of forced into, because during the Middle Ages, Jewish people, for the most part, weren't allowed to own land, right? They usually weren't allowed to run a business or whatever. They were usually, like, when it comes to, in Europe or whatnot, right? They were usually, like, segregated in the little ghettos, things like that, and not allowed to, they didn't have full rights as normal citizens did. If you remember in our stream a few weeks ago, there was an entire section where we talked about how the King of England was, basically owned all of the Jewish people in Britain and would tax them at different rates and stuff like that, and basically accuse them of crimes and then murder them and steal their property. We had a whole little section on that a couple streams ago. Right. So this was one of the ways that Jewish people in the Middle Ages were able to actually make a living, was to loan money out, to become money lenders, and that has in no small part contributed to this stereotype of Jewish people running all the banks. Right, and as international financiers, and of course everybody hates rich people, especially when they're not rich, and they blame Jewish people for financing things like the Russian Revolution and shit like that, and modern, and even today, people on not just the fringed right wing, not just the alt-right, but people in the modern mainstream Republican Party will say the same shit about Jews when it comes to, banking, international financiers, stuff like that. Right? Maybe they might kind of tap down on the anti-Semitism a little bit, but that same rhetoric is still there, and it's like all you got to do is dig under the surface just a little bit, and it just pops right back up. Like I'm saying, 3 or 4 times during this stream, these ideas are not new. It's the same shit over and over and over. Right? This is like a stereotype that literally goes back to the Middle Ages, for fuck's sake. And we still have people talking about this same shit today, right? So anyway, yeah, they believe all this stuff. Another thing that you would get from Christian identity types is that, you know, there are, like, essentially all of the bad shit that happens to anybody is because of Jewish people and minorities, you know. That minorities spread diseases, you know, they spread cancer and STD. Like, I don't know how the fuck you spread cancer. You know, cancer usually is not a communicable disease, but whatever, right? But, you know, that minorities spread STDs and crime and all this other shit, right? And the media is all fake and it's all run by Jews, and the Jews run Hollywood, and right. And one thing that you hear a lot is this term ZOG. If you've never heard this, it stands for Zionist Occupied Government, ZOG, right? And this is the idea that this kind of relates back to the protocols of the elders of Zion and whatnot. You know, the Jews run everything, right? And they've infiltrated the United States government, right? And this comes from it's basically a conspiracy theory that says in 1913, when they established the Federal Reserve System, and later on, a few years later, created the federal income tax, that was the point at which the United States government was taken over by Jewish people, right? So, you know, you hear, oh yeah, HPV causes cancer. Yeah, that's true. But anyway, but so yeah, you hear that a lot, you know. So if you've ever heard somebody use the word Zog, right, online, that's where this comes from as well. Okay? Comes from these guys. Another idea that, once again, is decades old, you know. Anyway, so some of these people, though, they really still hate banking. Some of them will even claim that things like credit cards or, you know, ATM cards, stuff like that, are the mark of the beast. Shit like that. So it's like ridiculous conspiracy theory horseshit all around, you know. That's kind of par for the course when it comes to these types of insane right-wing racist people, right? So we spoke a little bit about the Kazar Myth earlier. You know, the two house theology, right? So in the beginning, when it was just British Israelism, you know, they still sort of supported, you know, Semites, you know, Jewish people, stuff like that. But there was that a germ of an idea sort of implanted that, you know, well, if white people are the real Israelites, then that means that the current modern Jews must not be. So they must be pretenders in some way. You know, whether they're descended from a different tribe of Jew, you know, Judaism or whatnot, right? And by the time, you know, by the time that Christian identity comes around, this is evolved into what's called the Kazar Myth, right? And this is the idea that modern Jewish people, you know, Asconachi Jews, right, are not, you know, the real Jewish people, but they're actually descended from Khazars, right? So the Khazar state was sort of a multi-ethnic group that had a very large territory in Central Asia. It covered mainly modern-day Georgia and Ukraine, and you know, Armenia, right? Parts of Russia, right around that area, right around where the Black Sea is. That was the medieval Khazar state, right? And there is a set of letters called the Kazar Correspondence, which was some letters sent from, like, you know, some rabbis or something back then, that basically kind of detailed how the ruling elite of the Khazar state converted to Judaism, right around the year 930 CE, right? So, you know, there's a little bit of historic validity to that, but this has sort of evolved into this myth that modern Jews are, in fact, all descended from people who lived in the Khazar state, you know, the Khazar tribe, right? And have no, like, actual link to ancient Judaism, right? Which is not true at all. You know, in real life, just looking at the genetic evidence, right? Um, the modern Asconachi Jews, right, are, you know, not. And what did that term Asconachi, by the way? Those are the Jewish people of the diaspora, you know. So those are Jewish people that basically migrated from the Middle East into Europe, right? That's what they mean when they say Asconachi Jews, right? So it's basically like most of the Jewish population in Europe and North America is termed Asconachi Jews, right? Although there are other Jewish populations in the Middle East and stuff like that that, you know, were not descended from, you know, that diaspora that went into Europe and eventually America. So it's one like sort of distinct group of Jewish, you know, a Jewish population, you know, but it's not the only one, right? Basically saying though, but that's the myth. The myth is that basically these people were not, you know, have no actual connection to ancient Israel, and you know the people that, and they're really just descended from people that lived in that region, the Kazar region, and that has no genetic or archaeological evidence at all to support it. If you look at the genetics of modern Asconachi Jews, they are exactly what you would think. They are of mainly Near Eastern, Mediterranean, and Southern European heritage, which is exactly what you would think of groups of people who migrated out of the near Middle East and into Southern Europe. That's what the actual evidence says. So there's really zero, you know, zero evidence for the Kazar myth at all, right? But you still hear this shit, you know, this is definitely something that it's like very popular among white supremacist circles, right? And they use it as a justification for anti-Semitism, you know, right? Claiming that they're not the real Jews, and this is where that comes from. You know, it evolved out of British Israelism and took root in, you know, Christian identity. And even though Christian identity is essentially on the wane today, the ideas still persist, unfortunately, right? So, so let's take a little bit more about the history of Christian identity groups. Hang on a second, my hand kind of hurts. Shit hurts. In fact, I think we should save this, by the way. It's always a good idea periodically to save, you know, to save your work. What do you think? Not so bad, huh? I mean, we've only been doing this for about an hour. Okay. Sorry, I just need to take a quick break because my hand is like giving me pain. Oh, I forgot to color in his legs. Oh shit. Okay, let's color this guy's legs in. All right, so a little bit about the early founders of Christian identity movements, right? One of the early guys who was back when it was still basically British Israelism is a guy named Howard Rand who lived. He was born in 1899 and he lived until 1991. So this guy lived to be 102 years old, which kind of proves that there isn't a God, because if there was, God would have struck this guy down years and years and years earlier. Why is it that all the you know, conservative racist assholes get to live to be fucking 101 and shit, while like everybody else dies when they're like, you know, either gets assassinated or dies when they're in their 40s? I don't understand that shit. Anyway, so this guy, Howard Rand, he was the first person to actually coin the term Christian identity. And he was raised as a British Israelite, of course. Yellow. You know what? We have too much yellow on that. Let's make this orange. And he, in 1924, started that claim that modern Jewish people were the descendants of Esau, right? So thus the Canaanites. He was one of the first guys to kind of make that claim, right? Which at this point was not straight up the serpent seed doctrine, you know. The serpent seed doctrine, of course, being that, you know, Jewish people are descended of the devil themselves. We talked a little bit about that in the last stream, but as a quick overview of that, it's basically the idea that Jewish people are the descendants of Cain and Eve. Or, sorry, not Cain and Eve, Satan and Eve. That in the Garden of Eden, Satan had sex with Eve and gave birth to Cain. And that's the line of people that eventually became Jewish, the modern Jewish people, you know, who are also, the Canaanites were descendants of them too, apparently, right? And that's another reason that justifies, another reason they give to justify anti-Semitism, right? As the serpent seed doctrine. So anyway, just a quick refresher on that. But at this point, it wasn't straight up serpent seed. It was still just that sort of two house theology. But he was one of the first guys that started planting the seeds for this, right? Apparently, the guy was a complete racist piece of shit as well. I mean, you can guess that, of course. And he starts a group called the Anglo-Saxon Federation of America, which promoted this view, right? This is in 1924, right? And so starts having meetings and stuff of various like-minded racist individuals. And by 1937, his view of, his two-house theology has evolved straight up into the serpent seed doctrine. So that's basically where the shit came from. He's one of the guys that got the ball rolling on that. Right. He also had, some of the people that came to his meetings were early people who were involved with the KKK. In particular, a guy named William Dudley Pelley. This guy, William Dudley Pelley, also was involved with the Silver Shirts of America, the Silver Shirts. If you remember, we talked about them a couple of times in the last few streams. They were a pro-fascist group that were basically advocating for the Nazis in the 1930s. They were a pro-fascist, group that said that we should join the fucking Axis powers, right? And yeah, so kind of shows you, how all this stuff links together. You get fringe religious groups and fringe right-wing hate groups and straight up fucking pro-fascist Nazi groups. They all sort of overlap. One leads to another, and it's a good idea to read up on the stuff and know the history of these people so that you don't fall for their bullshit. Right. So anyway, and as we discussed in some of the other streams, some people involved with the Silver Shirts went on to start the fucking modern American militia movement too. Right? So, all these it's just one group sort of evolves into the next, but it's the same ideas over and over and over throughout the years, right? Another guy was named Wesley Smith. Now, he was sort of, so this guy, Howard Rand, was kind of the proto-father, he was still very much a British Israelite, and this guy, Wesley Smith, becomes probably the first true Christian identity pastor, right? Kind of the true father of the movement. And this was back in the 1940s, so about 20 years after the meetings with Howard Rand and the coining of the term Christian identity. This guy starts his own church, and it's like the first official kind of branded Christian identity church, right? And he was actually an organizer for the KKK, Wesley Smith. And apparently was a rifle instructor for the Ku Klux Klan. So he would actually train people in the Ku Klux Klan how to shoot rifles. Yeah, it sounds like a fucking very interesting, open-minded person there, doesn't he? Right. Let's see. Let's make this dragon blue, just so that it contrasts with this green goblin dude in his diaper. That's supposed to be a diaper. I don't know if you can tell, Anyway, so yeah, Wesley Smith starts his church in 1946 in Lancaster, California, called the Anglo-Saxon Christian Congregation, right? And by the 1950s, he's also joining another group, an anti-Semitic organization called the Christian Nationalist Crusade. They were pro-segregationist, right? So if you remember, like right around this time, there was a fight against segregation. He was pro-segregationist, right? His group, his anti-Semitic group, would also sell basically right-wing racist literature, things like the Elders of the Protocols of Zion. Another pamphlet that he sold was called The International Jew, which was something that Henry Ford, it was a set of 4 books that Henry Ford published originally, you know, because Henry Ford was a big time anti-Semite, right? So, you know, and this guy also, you know, basically that's how he made his money, was through selling hate literature, you know, through mail order and shit, right? Because this is like back in the day before you could get this stuff for free on the internet. You had to actually like go to some catalog and pay a guy $5 or whatever to send you books to radicalize you there, right? He also put out a monthly magazine called The Cross and the Flag, which promoted anti-Semitism and you know, segregation, stuff like that. And they would rant against things like all the usual conservative bullshit things. You know, they were anti-women's rights. They didn't want you know, black people to vote, stuff like that. They were really, really against race mixing. Really against that. They thought that was like the downfall of the white race and shit. In fact, that's something that you get a lot in even, you know, like that's a focus of modern hate groups. They really, really, really hate race mixing. You know, that term race traitor that's where this comes from as well. This guy, right? Anyway, and one of this guy's associates is a dude named William Potter Gale, who was, we spoke a little bit about him during our militia stream. He went on to form a group called the California Rangers, and eventually was involved with Posse Comitatus, and helped start off the American militia movement. So yeah, you know, like I said again, you know, they all sort of influence each other there. All these hate groups ought to kind of grow out of one another, you know, over the course of the 20th century. So anyway, eventually the name of this church gets changed to Church of Jesus Christ Christian, which was today was used, well, not today, but back in the 80s was taken over by the a hate group called the Aryan Nations. And the actual founder of the Aryan Nations was introduced to Wesley Smith by William Potter Gale. Right? So the guy that, you know, founds Posse Comitatus and the California Rangers and his influences the modern militia group, introduced the founder of what would become the Aryan Nations to the founder of the Christian identity movement. So there you go. That's the direct line all the way back from British imperialism to modern hate groups. Right? But all the way back from, you know, ideas that started in like 1590, right, and propagated throughout the 19th century, used to support colonialism and you know, in slavery, shit like that, all the way up into the 40s. The same ideas were used to support fascism with actual literal fascist groups like the Silver Shirts, and then the same ideas transformed into modern hate and militia groups. That's just, you know, funny how this shit evolves, right, folks? So anyway, that kind of brings us to how much time we got here. Where are we at? We are at, what time is it? 12:19. Okay, not too bad, not too bad. I want to see if I can end it by at least 1 o'clock today, but we might go a little longer because I actually kind of have a lot of stuff left to talk about. So that kind of brings us to the Aryan Nations. Right. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about this group. They are a notorious white supremacist group, which was active, formed in the. They actually formed in 1963. Oh no, not really. That's the Aryan Brotherhood. Sorry, wrong group. They formed in the 70s, the Aryan Nations, and were very active throughout the 80s. Were very influential when it came to the modern militia movement, stuff like that, and kind of came to a tragic end. Well, not so tragic for us, but tragic for them. Right. And we'll talk about that. So, basically, they were started in the 70s, right, by Richard Butler there, right? And they took the teachings of Wesley Smith and or Wesley Swift, that's his name, Swift, not Smith. And they kind of spun it off into a full-blown like neo-Nazi hate group. So Christian identity was still, even though it was racist and all that shit, it still kind of hid behind this veneer of just a usual fire and brimstone preacher kind of thing, right? You know, like they were just, because you saw all kinds of, like, they were not the only radical church, racist radical church group by any means, not at all, right? But, they sort of tried to keep that air of respectability, right? And claim we're not really racist, this is just, the revelation of God as we know it, blah, 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 right? Well, the Aryan Nations took all that, got rid of the veneer of the niceties, and just turned it into a straight up neo-Nazi hate organization, right? And, eventually they took over the original church, the Church of Jesus Christ Christian. They, after William Smith died, the guy Richard Butler sort of fought for control of it and eventually gained control of the church, right? And they were based out of a group of a 20-acre compound in where the hell was it? Hayden, Idaho, right, next to this lake, and Lake Hayden, I think, is what it was. And back in the 80s, they would have these conferences, these World Congress of the Aryan Nations, right? And all of these affiliated hate groups would show up. The KKK would show up, and things like that, right? All these different, and so think about it's sort of like a yearly Comic-Con, but for racist, white supremacist assholes, right? Would be held every year on this 20-acre compound, and where they would exchange ideas and they would organize and get funding and have seminars and do rifle training and all this other bullshit, right? And, all these neo-Nazi groups and skinheads, they were affiliated with all these people, Posse Comitatus and White Power fucking skinhead assholes. And all these guys would show up there and party and organize and get money and shit like that from each other, right? And spread their racist lies and plans about how they wanted to, start an ethno-state in the Pacific Northwest and all that shit, right? That's basically, if you ever hear that, the ethno-state in the Pacific Northwest, that's where this comes from. Like, that actually was something that started with Christian identity. It started with Christian identity, this idea that they wanted to reestablish Eden in the American Pacific Northwest, and that was sort of taken over by the Aryan Nations. And you still hear people talk about that shit today. You still hear white supremacist groups talking about how they want to take the Pacific Northwest and they want to make that into a white homeland. And, deport all non-minorities and supposedly kill them when they don't want to go quietly. That's where that comes from, right? Anyway, maybe that explains also why so many fucking neo-Nazis and Proud Boys and shit live in Portland. I don't know. You ever notice how, like, Oregon and Portland is sort of ground zero for the conflicts with this stuff? Over the last couple of years, there's, like, Seattle and Portland and all those places are, like, that's where all the big street fights and shit between, like, BLM and the Proud Boys and Antifa and shit would be, right? Maybe it explains why so many of these fucking white power types congregate around that place, because they want to start their fucking stupid, you know, homeland, phony baloney ethnic state there. Anyway, so yeah, that's just another idea that goes back, you know, decades, showing that these guys don't have any real ideas. They just repeat the same shit over and over and over again. Anyway, so what actually happened, right? Well, there was a spin-off, you know, they kind of, the Aryan Nations kind of came into prominent, like, mainstream notice in 1984, right? And it was because there was this spin-off group called the Order. Okay. And this group, they named themselves the Order after the fictional terrorist group in the Turner Diaries, which, if you remember, I was corrected last week about, and were actually written by a guy named William Luther Pierce. Thank you for correcting me about that. Whoever you were, I can't remember who. Somebody corrected me in the chat. Thank you for doing that. And anyway, the fictional terrorist group in that book, you know, that's what these guys sort of modeled themselves after, right? And basically, their plan was to, you know, overthrow the Zog, overthrow the Zionist-occupied government, and start their homeland, you know, their ethno-state in the Pacific Northwest. That was their plan, right? And originally, the way that they were going to get funding is that they were going to start a tree trimming business, believe it or not. So that was the original method. They were actually going to do it the legit way. And apparently, after they got their first tree trimming job, they said, fuck this noise, we're not doing this because, you know, if there's one thing that white supremacists don't like, it's actually working for a living, right? So they gave that shit up, like, after about 5 hours of actually working, right? Which kind of goes to show that, you know, these people are lazy. That's the other thing. You know, whenever you hear white supremacists and stuff talking about how, you know, illegal immigration is stealing their jobs and blah, 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 just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind in real life. It's not about, you know, it's not really about them being afraid of, you know, people outcompete, you know, stealing their jobs. They're afraid of people outcompeting them. That's what it really means, you know, because these fucking people are lazy. They're lazy, and if they would just go work, they don't like illegal immigrants. They don't like Asian immigrants and stuff like that because those people outcompete them. They work harder than they do, right? Because at their core, white supremacists are a bunch of entitled little crybabies. And that's one thing we always need to remember. You know, they're basically little weak entitled crybabies who have never had to work for anything in their entire fucking lives and think that everything should be handed to them on a silver platter because they're white. So that's really the core, you know, motivation of white supremacists, in my opinion. Anyway, moving on. So these guys, yeah, they decided, okay, that's too much work. We're not going to trim trees in order to fund our terrorist organization, right? So they decided that they were going to go off and they were going to rob people. And they said, well, you know what? We'll rob pimps and drug dealers. That's what we'll do. Okay, right. You know, we'll be vigilantes, right? But problem was, these guys had no idea what an actual pimp or an actual drug dealer looked like or who they even were. Because, you know, so what they did is they drove around and they tried to follow black men who had fancy cars because, you know, which kind of goes to show that, you know, not the brightest people here, right? You know, not the sharpest tools in the shed. Because according to them, you know, they're basing their... This is what happens when you base your fucking, like, entire world outlook on, like, you know, stereotypes and shit like that. Is that, you know, reality comes crashing down and you suddenly realize, oh, there's all this shit that I thought, there's actually no real fucking truth to it. So they couldn't actually find any drug dealers. They couldn't actually find any pimps because they were following people around. They were following black men around in fancy cars. And it turned out none of those guys ended up being pimps or drug dealers because these fucking idiots, like, you know, thought that every black person with a fucking fancy car must be a pimp, must be a drug dealer. It's like, there you go. fucking morons. Right? So that didn't work. They never actually managed to rob any pimps or drug dealers because they're a bunch of goddamn idiots, right? So then they decided, okay, well, we're just going to rip off stores and banks and shit like that. So they started ripping off, stores. Their first robbery was actually at a porn shop. Because, folks, back for you kids out there who are under the age of 30, you used to have to actually go to a store to buy porn. You couldn't just get it for free. You used to have to actually go outside and show your face and buy VHS tapes and shit like that. You couldn't just download all the free porn in the world anytime you wanted, absolutely for free in the comfort of your own home. So of course, these guys, that's considered degeneracy to these guys. So they go and they rob a porn shop and they get all of $300 for their first caper, right? But eventually they start robbing banks, stuff like that, getting more money, and then they start robbing armored cars, which is something that I believe the protagonist in the Turner Diaries does. They rob armored cars. I think so, right? And eventually they get $7.9 million from all of their illegal criminal activity, right? And, here and there, a few of them go to jail and they get busted, blah, 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 blah. But they basically became a big-time problem in, around 1984 or so. And they all eventually get busted because one of the guys gets caught passing a phony dollar bill or a phony counterfeit money, right? Because that was another one of their criminal enterprises, was to counterfeit money. And they sucked so bad at it that their bills were, got them caught, essentially. And so this guy gets busted, one of the guys gets busted passing one of their phony ass bills because they don't know how to fucking counterfeit. And decides to turn, he's going to be an informant. And this eventually, this eventually gets them all arrested. And all these guys eventually go to jail, and the leaders die in prison, But before this happened, they eventually did, they did steal $7.9 million, and they were responsible for the murder of a Jewish talk show host named Alan Berg in 1984. So these guys were serious. They were fucking killing people, They were stealing money, they were killing people, holding people at gunpoint, shit like that, So dangerous fucking shit, right? And one of their robberies, they used a bomb with a timer on it and blew up a movie theater in order to distract the police. Luckily, there was nobody in the theater at the time and nobody died, but that's just pure fucking luck. That could have resulted in major fucking casualties right there, right? So yeah, these guys were nothing to fucking sneeze at, right? Dangerous fucking people here. Anyway, the guy that turned informant, yeah, his name was Tom Martinez, and he basically brought down the entire group. So the order, right around when that happened, that sort of started spelling the, downfall of the Aryan Nations in general, right? But they still sort of hung around, the Aryan Nations, and it was until another event which occurred in, I think it was the early 90s, right? And what it was is that at this compound for the Aryan Nations that they had in Idaho, Hayden, Idaho, there were two Native Americans driving by in a car, right? And they were named, I have their names here, what was it? Two Native Americans, Victoria Keenan and her son Jason, right? And they were on the road outside of the property, driving around, and there was some backfire from their car, right? And of course, there's armed guards around this compound because they're being they're being surveilled by the FBI and shit like that, right? So they have armed guards all over the place, and these guards open fire on this car, right? And luckily, they don't kill the Keenans, but they pull them over, and start basically beating the crap out of them with the butts of their rifles, right? Assaulting these two people, this Native American woman and her son. And so, they basically got with the Southern Poverty Law Center and sued the living shit out of the Aryan Nations because they were, they took them to court, and by 2000 they got a judgment in their favor, saying that the guards were negligent, blah blah blah, shit like that, and they put our lives in danger, that kind of thing. And they won a $6.3 million judgment from the Aryan Nations, right? So the founder, the guy Butler, is still alive at this point. He's like in his 90s, right, at this point, and he has to declare bankruptcy because he doesn't have $6 million. So they end up putting the compound up for sale, and the Southern Poverty Law Center donates the money to the Keenans so that they can bid on the property, and they eventually win it. Right? So they have to give their compound up to the Keenans, right? And that included all intellectual copyrights of everything inside. So because of this, because the Keenans now, these two people, this Native American lady and her son, they own all of the rights to anything with the name Aryan Nations on it, or Church of Jesus Christ Christian. So no group can legally use those names anymore. Right? So, which hasn't stopped some hate groups, because they're hate groups, obviously, so they don't give a shit. So there are plenty of hate groups out there that claim that they're, the legit Aryan Nation or whatnot. Right? But, that opens them up to a lawsuit to get sued. Right? The property eventually was sold off and turned into a park, which was, I think it was dedicated to Alan Berg, actually. That's a nice little burn there. And the Aryan Nation never really recovered from that as an organization. It's splintered off, and there's little groups here and there around that claim that they're the real Aryan Nation, but they're essentially dead at this point, right? So yeah, that's kind of good news for the world. Is that they went a little too far. They pushed it a little too far there, and they were kind of already on the way down. Like white supremacist groups were by 2000, like these sort of organized hate groups like this. At that point, they were sort of on the wane. So this sort of just put like a nail in the coffin for these people, right? And it was like, good, fuck them. Couldn't have happened to a nicer group of people. Fuck them. I hope they got everything. I hope they took their fucking underwear too. Shit, seriously. So yeah. Anyway, let's see. We talked about the order. We talked about the Aryan Nations. So the problem is, where are we at now? 1238. First off, it's not dead though. Christian identity, maybe it's more militant expression through the Aryan Nations and various hate groups. Maybe the official organizations may be gone, but the ideas still persist. You see it a lot online, the things that they talked about. Everything from the notions of Zog, and then the idea of the serpent seed doctrine, all of that stuff, all of the hate things and the desire to create a white ethno-state in the Pacific Northwest, all of that shit's still around. Bad ideas never truly die. That's the thing. You don't ever really kill bad ideas, because there's always some stupid fucking moron out there bringing it back. And it takes, the price of free speech is eternal vigilance. People are free to say whatever they want. And the price of that is that you need to have somebody out there to counter the hate speech, counter the bad ideas. You can't outlaw it. That's the problem. This is the United States, it's a free country. You can believe whatever the fuck you want. You can say whatever you want, right? And you can't make it. You can do your best in any official capacity with a business or a government agency, something like that, to not allow hate speech on your platform, that kind of thing. But you can't throw somebody in jail for just believing racist shit. That's unfortunately, Or I guess I would even say fortunately. I wouldn't, would you want to live in a country like that if you just like believe the wrong thing that you can get thrown in jail? No, even if it is some horrible racist shit like that. It's like you have a right to believe whatever the fuck you want. You know, the the thing is that you don't have a right to have other people just accept it at face value and not suffer any consequences for the things you believe, right? And it's up to us in order to stop that. It's up to us in order to make sure that ideas like this get fought against, and that's just kind of one of the weaknesses of I guess a weakness, but also kind of a strength of our system, of our society, But you have to be armed with the right kind of tools in order to do this, and this is why I talk about these things, right? This is why I talk about these things in order to like educate people so that they know when they encounter these ideas and they can fight against them, right? Anyway, so yeah, the thing is, it's still around. You still see a lot of ideas that are inspired by these people, in especially in the modern alt-right. Not a day goes by that I don't get comments from someone on YouTube or I see something on Twitter, that kind of thing. People calling me, a Zog puppet, that kind of thing. The Proud Boys, for example, are very much like an extension of this, right? And you'll see like this is why they all congregate in the Pacific Northwest, right? Like we mentioned earlier, that kind of thing. So these ideas are out there and they need to be fought against. They just because the organization as an actual entity may be gone doesn't mean that they're defeated or they've just gone away, right? And there are still plenty of churches out there that preach Christian identity. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, there's about 11 like official churches that identify themselves as Christian identity churches. There's one, for example, in Georgia, the Covenant People's Ministry in Georgia. Another one called the Kingdom Identity Ministries in Arizona. All over the place, Nebraska, Tennessee, Florida. So, they're out there and it's still being spread. And there's plenty of churches out there even that still teach British, Israelism, right? Not, maybe not all the way Christian identity, but they still teach the idea that white people are the real, descendants of Israel and that kind of thing, right? So you still see these bad ideas out there, man, And the thing is, it's like, it is on the way down. Christian identity groups, since 2017, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, have decreased by 45%, right? So there's roughly 11 of them left. But the bad news is that, hate groups nowadays are not centralized like they used to be, right? They're still, they're very much decentralized. You see, on the internet, they're organizing through web pages and social media. They don't have to have, yearly conferences where they all meet in a fucking compound in Idaho anymore. When they can just do that online every single day in chat rooms and in bulletin boards and places like Reddit, shit like that. They don't have to rob banks anymore when they can just do a GoFundMe or invest in cryptocurrency or run some kind of like internet scam and just milk people out of their money. Or they can just sell their, the internet has really pretty much been like the saving boon for white supremacists, because before the internet came along, they were kind of on their way out. Late 90s, early 2000s, these groups were pretty much like, the hardcore, hate groups were essentially kind of going away. And the internet sort of, the idea like the ease at which someone can organize, the anonymity of it, and the ability to reach thousands of people at once really kind of gave a shot in the arm to these groups and gave birth to what's called the alt-right. That and also Ron Paul. gave birth to the alt-right, and that's a subject for another video. I think I'll do another stream about, we've been kind of leading up to this. We've been kind of leading up to the modern, where the alt-right came from. I think that, if not our next stream, it'll be a stream coming soon. We'll talk about the beginning of the alt-right movement and, Ron Paul's, how it sort of grew out of the elect Ron Paul for president sort of campaign. And, looking at its influences from, hate groups in the past, right? So, kind of dangerous shit. And you got to remember, these people are still around, even though, the organized hate groups like this, like the KKK, like the Aryan Nations, stuff like that, they're sort of, the membership, like official membership in those groups is sort of declining a little bit. That also has a lot to do with the internet too. So it's like, it's a two-edged sword. It's like we can use the internet to fight these people. You see that a lot too. You see that a lot in groups where, hang on a second. Let me just go up here. Let's change this to multiply. Actually, that doesn't really do anything. Let's just go back to normal. You see that too in a lot of groups, is people using the internet to expose these people, getting them fired from their jobs, stuff like that, right? And that's so it can go both ways. It's like the internet helped these guys survive, and it can also be used to destroy them, right? So, keep all that in mind as well, right? Anyway, but yeah, they're modern, descendants here, right? Like the current alt-right, they're just as dangerous, and although it's like you don't have armed revolutionaries robbing banks or holding up, armored cars, stuff like that, you still have lots of violence and stuff when it comes to the modern alt-right, things like the Christchurch shooting, Charlottesville, people getting run over, stuff like that. You have groups like the Proud Boys going around assaulting and possibly murdering people. Like at the CHOP. The Proud Boys were basically implicated in some of the shootings at the Seattle's Autonomous Zone, that kind of thing. You have people like Dylan Roof, those lone shooters that go out and inspired by hate rhetoric that they get online. Right, so it's like they're still just as dangerous as their forebearers from the 20th century, the 19th and 20th centuries. It's just now it's kind of it's a little more dangerous because it's sort of like it's decentralized, and you can't just sue them anymore out of existence like you could, the Aryan Nations. You can't just you shut down one website and another one pops up, and you can do the best you can, and you can, and that's the thing, is like you got to be vigilant. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand against them and we shouldn't fight them. It's like, no, we should do everything we can to limit the spread and influence of these people, right? As much as humanly possible, and that's like I said earlier, that's part of the reason why I do these videos. Anyway, we're about 12:49. My hand hurts, man. I hope that I'm being a little. I hope you guys are getting some, some value from these streams here. I hope I'm able to, give you some interesting content and some things to think about. Maybe educate a little bit some people, and and if you guys like it, I mean, if you have any ideas about what we should talk about next, please let me know. I'm thinking kind of building up to talking about the alt-right, but, we don't have to move directly to that. So any suggestions, just put them all down there in the chat. Let's read some of the comments. I don't want to do a red eye. Let's do a green eye. There we go. Green. Okay. Let's read some of the comments that you guys have here. Let's see, Dynacat, you're why I never get anything done, Oh, sorry. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Maybe just put me on in the background while you do your stuff. That way I'm not impeding on your productivity there. Let's see. Sean Nillabud, the English were always fond of delusion and genocide. Uh, yeah, for sure. Are you actually in the United Kingdom, Sean? Do you live in Europe? Um, that'd be kind of interesting to get the perspective of someone who actually lives there and what they think about all this, you know. Um, let's see. Louis the Hedgehog. Extermination or slavery, what regime does that sound like? Yeah. Sounds like sounds like some fascists there, huh? You know, and that just goes to show you're exactly right there, Louis. You know, it's all these people are all sort of interconnected, you know. Like we showed earlier, you can draw a direct line from these types of British Israel. Oh, damn it, wrong. That's the wrong layer. Okay, you know, you can draw a direct line, like we said earlier, from British Israelism to Christian identity to support for fascist hate groups in the 40s, all the way to militia groups, and then to the alt-right. You know, it's like a lot of the same people were believing in all the same things. So it's definitely true. Dynacat. Blue dragon is a sea slug. Blue dragons are Galacus and Atlanticus are a species of sea slugs which can attack humans, and their sting can be more painful than that of a jellyfish. You mean that's like a real animal? Like blue dragons? So it's a kind of sea slug? Oh, wow, man, the more you know. Adversary Fandom 2. Sometimes you could find a discarded porn magazine in a forest. That was always, you know, as a small child, I think one time I found a porn mag outside, and you know, when you're like, I think I was like what, 12, something like that. And yeah, it's kind of nasty. I think I gave it to my friend. This is something, looking back, if I were to encounter that today, I probably wouldn't touch it because I'd be afraid of any stains or bodily fluids on it. But you know, when you're 12 years old, it's like finding the forbidden fruit. But no. Um, you know, that was that was one of the things from kind of disgusting now when you think about it, right? Of course, I think mainly my main source for nasty stuff when I was a kid was just like Cinemax. You had those sort of like softcore, like Showtime Cinemax things that would come on at like 2 in the morning or whatever. That they wouldn't actually show everything, you know. It was like softcore stuff, but you got plenty of boobies from them. Like, you know, that's what. Hey kids, that's what we had to do for porn when I was a kid. We had to like go on late night cable at 2 in the morning and get like fake porn. So let's see. Was there counterfeit money paper with the value written with a pencil? I don't know. I don't know. I just all I know all the article said was that their counterfeit money was crappy, and that's how they eventually got busted. So anyway, kind of makes sense though that they wouldn't really be good at it. You know, it takes skill and dedication to counterfeit money. You know, have you ever looked at a dollar bill? All those little lines and shit on it. It's like, I actually tried when I was a teenager. I tried to draw a dollar bill, and it was like I got a magnifying glass and shit, and I just gave up. It was just, there's like, you know, of course when they actually, I didn't know this. See, when I was a kid, I was kind of stupid, and I didn't understand the concept of manufacturing when I was a child. So I kind of thought everything was made by hand in factories. I didn't know that they had machines and that you could take, you know, I didn't know that like a dollar bill when they actually draw it, it's like, you know, they do it on a huge like board and then reduce it down, you know, because I was just a kid, so I didn't understand that. So I actually got a magnifying glass and I was trying to copy a dollar bill, and it was like, God, forget it. How do they do this? These people must have like, you know, microscopes and stuff. Like, anyway, that was funny. My my short experience with trying to counterfeit money didn't go anywhere. Anyway, guys, we're just about at 1 o'clock, so I think this one was perfectly timed at exactly 2 hours. Thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate that. I think, yeah, I think maybe next time we'll see, because the subject of the modern alt-right, there's so many aspects to it, you know, that you can't really cover it in one stream. So it'll probably be something that we'll cover in several different streams, you know, and it's sort of have to kind of think about how I want to organize it, right? You know, because there's lots of different ways to talk about it. It's like you talk about things like, you know, you talk about like, you know, Jared Taylor, that kind of thing. Do you talk about actual white like hate groups? Do you talk about, you know, 4chan or you know, memes or whatever? It's like, how do you want to? I'm not even really sure where to begin when it comes to the modern alt-right. But I do want to start covering them as well because, you know, we've been working up to it, you know. But first I want to go back and see if there's anything we missed, because it's kind of cool to get the history of this stuff, right? Jeannie B! Hey, how you doing? Thank you for joining. Yeah, Skinamax, totally. After dark. Yeah, definitely, for sure. Thanks for joining, man. I'm just about to end it. Sorry. I don't know if you were on this whole time, but just about done with the stream. Anyway, but yeah, I think that's something we'll start covering probably beginning in the next stream. I just have to make an outline and think about how to organize it right. So I might do a couple of streams over the next month or so, just talking about like current events in the news and stuff like that, until I can write something out and make it coherent. But anyway, I think that's pretty much it for today. Let's go ahead and end this. It's yeah, we're at exactly 2 hours. I think that's a pretty good stopping point. Thank you, guys. Let's take a look at what we did so far today. Not too bad, you know, kind of got a little bit of that done. I think it's turning out pretty good. You know, my little goblin when in his diaper here, I think that looks pretty good. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and do my ending speech and stuff here, as I always have to do. Please like and subscribe if you can. You know, always got to say that. And this here is my ending stuff. This is my DeviantArt site where I put up my artwork. So if you want to see more of my artwork, you know, please come and join me on DeviantArt. Here's the thing that we did over the last 5 or 6 streams here. Here's that thing. If you want to get it, you can just download it straight from here if you want a copy of it. You know. And I'll also put up the other picture that we did of the deep one. I'll probably put that up here right after this stream, so it'll be here. Anyway, check me out there. If you like the oh yeah, and also let me put all this in the chat so that you guys can get it. And if you like, you know, what I do and you want to support me monetarily, you can check me out on my SD shop. Here's my SD shop here. If you like me, you want to see me keep doing this, please consider buying something. I have prints and stuff like that. Starting to put my little creatures up on here too, you know, that kind of thing. So I also got some comics down here as well. You know, the comics here are actually safe for kids. These 3, the ones that are in color. This one, not so much, but these 3, yeah. You know, if you have little children and you want to give them some monster stuff, you know, those are safe for kids. Anyway, check me out on SD. And if you want to see my webcomic, it's here, Hawanja.com. Fun for the whole stupid family. There's ninjas and stuff like that, demons. There's about to be a huge fight scene coming pretty soon here. And if you want to see me talk about non-political stuff, you know, movies, TV shows, video games, toy reviews, that kind of thing, check me out on UCD videos. I'll put that down in the chat also. So, need to start getting some love from my other channel, because like I get like no views on it. So anyway, guys, thank you all so much. Thank you for joining me, Dynacat and Sean Nillabud. Lewis the Hedgehog, thank you again. Adversary Fandon, good to see ya. Jeannie B, fantastic to hear from you as always. Thank you all so much, and I will be back next Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. You guys are great, and I think I'm out of here. Adios.